Welcome to Unit 11, Lecture 2, on fronts, which is what happens when you have air masses interacting with each other. So we talked back in Unit 11, Lecture 1 on about those air masses, about them being warm or tropical, and cold or polar, and also about them being dry or moist. Dry being called continental air masses, moist being called maritime air masses. We talked about the 6 major ones that we see and influence our weather here in the U.S. So when we have two air masses interact with each other, specifically when a cool mass and a warm mass interact, the air does not mix because the cool air mass is more dense and the warmer air mass is less dense. And so we get this boundary between the two air masses called a front. And changes in the middle latitudes weather, that's us, we're in the middle latitudes, between 30 and 60 degrees north or south latitude, in the middle there, 60 to 90 being up by the pole, 0 to 30 being by the equator. In these mid-latitudes, we get weather forming along various types of fronts. And in this lecture, we're going to talk about those fronts, how they form, and even a little bit about what kind of weather they can bring and why. The first one we'll talk about is a cold front. And a cold front is the front edge of a moving mass of cold air. And it moves beneath warm air like a wedge. So what we've got going on here is we've got our cold air, and our cold air is coming into an area. I'm going to draw it in blue. Alright, that's our cold air is pushing that way. And while that happens, the warm air that cold air is moving into gets pushed up. And as that warm air gets pushed up, clouds form over in this area, because as that warm air gets pushed up, the water vapor condenses and we get clouds. And a lot of times we get cumulonimbus or regular cumulus. Clouds form as that warm front goes up. So you get very large cumulus and sometimes cumulonimbus clouds along fast-moving cold fronts. All right, and if we get a long line of heavy thunderstorms, lots and lots of cumulonimbus clouds, we get what is called a squall line. Alright, and what happens is they occur when warm, moist air just ahead of the cool front shoots up. And these are also known as supercell thunderstorms. And these are very violent thunderstorms, producing lots of rain, heavy downpours, lots of potential for hail and lightning, and sometimes even tornadoes can come from these supercell thunderstorms. A warm front is the front edge of warm air that is replacing cold air. So in a warm front, it's a little bit different. Again, the warm air is going to move up. But if we have an area here of cold air, kind of just sitting there, and we bring in some warm air as it starts coming in, that warm air is going to come in and slowly rise up over that cold air. And what you'll end up with are clouds forming along different areas of the cold front. And so we get clouds forming way ahead of the surface location of the cloud front, or the base of the front. Right down here is the base. Alright, so we got the base of the front here, and clouds forming way ahead of it. And a lot of times, warm fronts produce precipitation over large areas. And sometimes that's violent. Not really as violent usually as a supercell thunderstorm, but you can get many days of heavy rains from nimbostratus clouds, which could also we could also have lots of wind associated with it as well. So if we take a look, we're going to look mostly right now at these side views. Here's the cold front. You got the cold air moving in, causing the warm air to move up and make tall puffy clouds, cumulus and cumulonimbus clouds. Whereas in a warm front, you got the warm air starts to move and gently rise over the cold air that's already there. You get long lines of clouds for several days, and somewhere in there, if the warm air was a moist air mass, we can get some rain. There are two other kind of fronts. One of them is a stationary front, and that's where we get two air masses near each other, but they're moving very slowly or not at all, and they're not really interacting. They're kind of just sitting next to each other. The fourth type is an occluded front, and it's a front that happens when cold air mass overtakes a warm air mass and lifts that warm air mass off the ground. Alright. There are four symbols for the four fronts. Usually blue triangles represent cold fronts. The triangle points in the direction the front is moving. A warm front is a bunch of semicircles. If it's in color, they're generally red, and again, the semicircles point in the direction the front is moving. A stationary front shows both the triangles and the semicircles, and triangles point away from the cold air, and semicircles point away from the warm air. In an occluded front, again we have the semicircles and the triangles, but in this case they're purple, and this is where a cold front is forcing a warm front up. It's showing the direction of movement again, and this causes severe weather, really severe weather. Occluded fronts are responsible for a lot of the worst storms that we see that are not like hurricanes. A lot of the storms that we see here in the U.S., whenever you see these purple lines on a map, you know that bad weather is coming or is in that area. Alright, just giving you an idea of an occluded front. Alright, here we have the cold air moving in. We got a map here showing it here. So here's St. Louis. Okay, here is our cold front. Over in the Indianapolis-Columbus area, we've got this warm front. So you can see if we drew a line right down the middle here, we see the characteristic torpedo shape of a cold front, and on the other sideline we see that nice sloping shape of a warm front. Well, when the cold front moves, it lifts that warm front up, and so it takes the nimbostratus clouds that are being formed by the warm front part, the front edge of this area, and creates super tall cumulonimbus clouds and really severe thunderstorms. And this is the occluded front that we can see right here. Alright, another picture just showing you a couple types of occlusions. Kind of read up on them a little bit. It just shows a cold front overtaking and catching up a warm front. So the big thing is we got the cold front and warm front combine with each other to make this new kind of front where the warm air is getting lifted way up. Alright, so here's the cold front coming in, and as this cold front comes in, that warm front gets lifted up, and that warm air gets lifted up and creates the towering huge cumulonimbus clouds. That is it for Lecture 2 on fronts. If you have any questions, bring them into class. As we move on, we'll talk about severe weather and the weather patterns we see as these fronts start to interact some more and what they bring. And then eventually by Lecture 4, we'll start doing a little bit of weather prediction and coming up with what is going to happen. Have a good night.